And since I know, Ramiro, you'll have to leave soon if you want to answer it first, and then we'll go from there. So, majority of college students in the state are actually in community and technical colleges. And debt has doubled for students at community colleges since 2008. Currently, we have a tuition decrease, but for community and technical colleges, it's only 5%. However, since 1970, whereas the state paid about 30% the state paid 70% of the cost of education and families paid 30%. Now that's flipped. The state only pays 30% of the cost and families pay 70%. Moving forward, what do you see the role the state should play in funding higher education, and specifically for community and technical colleges?
You want me to begin?
Yeah.
All right. Before I escape out here, one of the things that we have to do with McCleary, I think, is redefine what does basic education mean. And I think that basic education should include higher education, in my opinion. Although we've been talking about K through 12, but right now we're in a state where you're going to be having 2 out of 3 jobs by 2 years from now, 2018, are going to require post-high school education. We're in an innovative community here. We've got the Microsofts, the Googles, the Amazons, but instead of having our kids attending those companies, we're bringing in a lot of workers from overseas. At the same time, as you've heard here before, we have 1/4 of our kids aren't finishing high school, and of the kids that do finish high school, you have a good percentage, over 40%, that are going back for remedial education that should have been done in high school, and we've been putting now $14,000 a year into that education. So the state, first of all, at the K through 12, has to make sure that we're getting results and hold people accountable to make sure that we are graduating the kids, that we aren't relegating the kids on the eastern side of the state or in the south to services industry. They deserve a good quality education, and that good quality education should not be limited just to K through 12. We have to look at how we're going to address it and give them the post-education so they can be part of our society. I'm a fiscal conservative, but I'm also a social conscious person who believes that if not, we're going to pay a far greater cost to address these. So while McCleary is looking at K through 12, the state needs to be looking beyond that, both at the pre-K and the higher ed, and looking at how do we help fund that education to make sure that every member of the state of Washington that's going through our school system is prepared for college and post-college. And when you're going to the colleges, you have to be looking at, are you going to technical schools? Are you going to be going through apprenticeships? There are different venues that you could be going through. It doesn't have to necessarily be the community college or 4-year university programs. This is a longer argument than this legislative session that will just be looking at the McCleary K through 12 piece, but I think it's a critical piece for us to look at, because we can't have 1/4 of our students not graduate and then have another 30–40% that are tied up in the colleges, and I think it's like 40% that aren't finishing the colleges. So we have to be looking at that, and the state has a responsibility, because if not, for everyone that's not finishing and not getting gainfully employed, we're paying a far greater cost to be able to sustain those people in our state. So very quickly, that's my response. I'm sorry I have to rush off here. I've got 2 other events at this time of the year, but please feel free to reach out to me, and we can have coffee, and I'm more than willing to talk with every one of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And since we started with Michelle first, we'll start with Darcy this time, and we'll come back down.
So I think that the cost of college is outrageous, and the amount that we're expecting middle class and working class families to pay is crippling, both to those families and to students like you who have to take on enormous amounts of debt to get the kind of education that will allow this state to be competitive. I believe that Washington State should actively work toward a system in which ultimately at least the first 2 years of college are fully funded by the state. And ideally, every person coming out of our public school system gets either the technical training or a college degree that allows them to get a fantastic job and be a productive member of our community.
Thank you.
Darcy. You know, 11 years ago, I worked on the Kucinich campaign, and we were talking about free college at that time, paid for by reforming the tax system. And in our state, we have a very regressive tax system. If we were to reform the B&O tax alone, we would be able to provide for the 2 years of college education or technical school that Darcy was referring to. I think that the least the state should be doing is investing in the assets of its state, which are the human resources, the people. It's an investment in our future by investing in education for our students. And the other thing I would look at quite strongly is student loans. I think, you know, banks should not be allowed to increase the interest rate to a student. Some of our most vulnerable population in terms of being able to repay the debt. Plus, we made the bankruptcy laws much more difficult for students to file bankruptcy from student loans. We didn't do that for corporations, by the way. So, for example, Donald Trump was able to file bankruptcy several times and reincorporate and do the same thing again. Students are not allowed to do that. So what I would propose is that, you know, just like students have to do community service, banks should have to do community service. Let's have them take, if they want to be a middleman, they can take the money at the same rate that's given, that they get it from the feds, and they can lend it and service those loans for the students without any additional charges. That could be their community service. That could be their investment in the students. And in the end, you know, I also think you got to have some skin in the game when you're a student, right? So I do think it's important for there to be, you know, some sort of payment. So what could that be? Textbooks right now. When I went to college, I thought it was painful then to pay $35 for a textbook, right? I mean, today it's $200, $300, $400 for a textbook. It's insane. And the textbooks change all the time. So you can't, you buy it one quarter, you sell it back, and it's at, you know, 20% of the cost that you just paid for it, and it's obsolete on top of it. It's a racket. I would take a serious look at that as well. So there are some changes that we can make to make college more affordable, and career and technical college more affordable as well. And I would be also open to seeing, you know, some kind of loan forgiveness if you give back a year of your life, you know, to you know, in your area, whatever your degree is in, you know, you give back a year of your life in service to others in that area. I think that that is something that encourages a sense of volunteering anyway and giving back, but it also has a benefit of you know, giving that person an initial jump on their career as well. And at the same time, the loan forgiveness. So those are just some ideas that I have, but we do need to take a strong look at how much college costs. It is outrageous.
Thank you.
I'd like to start by agreeing a little bit with what you two had to say. One is college is incredibly expensive, and you wonder why it's outrageous. The textbook industry, that's a racket. It was a racket when I went to school. It's a racket today. I love the idea of debt forgiveness in exchange for community service or doing something good. I think that's awesome, and I think it's something that would benefit us as a community and as a country. I also agree with having some skin in the game. When we talked about backgrounds, I kind of skipped over, but I paid for college myself. I was the oldest of 4 boys. Dad worked 2 jobs, Mom was at home with the kids. We drove her crazy. I'm sure many times she wished she was going off to work. And she just worked at home. I should put that a little bit differently. But the reality is I put myself through college. Had I decided to go to college right after high school, I'm not sure my parents could have afforded it. Whether matter of fact, I know they couldn't. I would have had a lot of loans and things. But by going to school later on, I really had a sense of appreciation where I paid. I worked along the way. I took out student loans. I personally grapple with, I have 2 daughters. They're 11 and 13. They're 6th and 7th grade here in Bellevue schools. And I personally grapple with, when they go to college, one is, how am I going to pay for it? And 2 is, what do I expect of their contribution? So before I sit here and say that we should or shouldn't have free college, whether it be 1 year, 2 year, or 4 years, I look at my own family, and my wife had the great fortune of having 4 years tuition and books paid by her parents. She worked during the summer. So we kind of go back and forth on that because I believe that you should have some skin in the game. The question really relates to what is the state's role in funding higher education. To springboard off of what Romero Valderrama had to say is that yes, we need to fund basic education because myself included, I was a product of public schools, big city. You're able to slip through the cracks. It took me a year of what they used to call junior college to catch up before I was ready for college. Too many kids are graduating high school or not graduating with the basic skills they need in order to attend college and have college level courses. Last week I had a personal tour of Renton Technical College and I got a much better understanding of how this system works. And I can tell you this is the hidden jewel of Washington. Bellevue College, Renton College, these are incredible universities. And one thing that I pledged to Kevin was that I will do everything that I can when I'm elected to continue that funding and increase it wherever possible. And to the degree that we can lessen the burden on the students, I'm all for that. I'm actually a little surprised to hear that the tuition reduction was only 5%. I was led to believe that it was higher than that. But I can tell you that having a robust economy, having this state grow at above average, when there's more money in the budget, I would fight to have more dollars put into this university system. And when I look at, earlier I talked about one of my key issues for this district is transit, or the lack of. I'm not a proponent of Sound Transit 3 for many reasons, but let me put it in terms that all of you can understand. $54 billion. We haven't fully funded basic education. The funding model has shifted, as you described, from 70-30 to 30-70. How much of that revenue, that potential revenue, could we shift toward all of you if we were to raise the sales tax or raise property taxes or raise vehicle licensing fees? Before we put a dime into a train that isn't going to come out here for 25 years, I say we fully fund education and we allocate more dollars to the states, colleges, and universities. Thank you.
Thank you. And for clarification for the tuition reduction, for anyone that doesn't know, there was a 20% reduction at regional universities, so such as like Western, Eastern, Central. There was a 15% reduction at research universities like Washington State University and UW, and only a 5% reduction at community and technical colleges. So that was the final product. What, Paul?
For 2 years.
For 2 years, right. So it also still has to be renewed.
What was the question?
Oh yeah, sorry, it was a long-winded one. So basically, what role do you see the state playing in funding higher education and specifically community and technical colleges?
Well, it's hard to be towards the end because everybody else has already said some really good stuff. Well, I am one of 9 kids. My father would have given anything to have been able to pay for my college. But for me, I joined the military at 17, and I stayed in the military for almost 10 years, and I got out, I got disability, and my college was fully funded as a veteran. That's not for everybody. I also come from a system of being a native, and I don't remember which one of you guys said it, but payback. Indian Health Services provides scholarships, and then you do payback. In my tribe, we're paying back. We have a naturopath doctor, and we fill out a paper every year, and she gets, I think, 10% of her student loans forgiven for every year that she works for us. So it doesn't just apply to natives. I do think that we need to be better stewards of our children, and we need our children to be educated. Some talked already about higher education, but I think the real starting point is preschool. And in preschool, getting parents to be involved and then getting them to stay involved with their kids all the way through K-12. Studies have shown that parents that are involved in kids' school activities and in their school have a higher success rate of graduation. I come from an area in Darrington where it's rural, So to be a college student, you have Everett Community College or you have Skagit Valley College. So not only do you have tuition and books, but you got either a 45-mile drive to school or you got a 55-mile drive to school. So there's more than tuition, there's more than books, there's more than fees. And we need to make it so it's accessible to everybody. And we need to have quality education because we are Americans and we are one of the greatest countries in the world. I'm kind of a little bit excited on that, but we need to stay up in technology, we need to stay up in education because tomorrow is going to be a different day. And we need our young people capable. I do believe in financial aid. I do believe in grants that you don't have to pay back. We just need more of them. We need to find them. We need to get more and more funding for school.
Thank you.
How many of you found the last 2 years of high school as sort of a postponement of your life? Raise your hand. Anyone?
Did high school
Anyone?
Did high school brought
I have an 8-year-old who can run an iPhone better than I can. And yet we still have a sort of archaic 1830s style desk in a row education model. We're stuck in this box, if you will. Someone at the table talked about thinking outside the box. Well, for me, there is no box. That's why I support charter, choice, and voucher system. My partner ran for office in about 2012. He was running on charter, choice, and voucher. What this does is it creates incentives. It creates in a free market environment where new ideas are fostered. We're stuck in this idea of funding. Well, let me tell you, we spend approximately $14,000 federal, state, and local on education. You take a class of 30, that's over $400,000. If you give me $400,000, I hire a teacher, buy a laptop for everybody in the class, and fly them around the world. It's not just a funding problem. And there's going to be plenty of people in Olympia that are going to be talking about the funding problem. I'm a different voice. I want to talk about how we can foster choice. I don't think that it's right that only the wealthiest kids have opportunity to go to the best schools. This is the start of income inequality, right here, the lack of choice at that young level. Now, do I think that we need, tossing more money at this is going to solve the problem? Well, no, I actually think it's going to make the problem worse because that money has to come from somewhere. When the framers of our Constitution, when they talked about ample funding, I don't think they were thinking blank check. Our families don't just have the ability to increase their income. When we increase property tax, capital gains tax, income tax, tax here, tax there, that increases the cost of living on your parents and on you. It decreases our freedom. It does not empower us. It creates more power for the government. So circling back around, I have 3 kids that graduated. My oldest just graduated from UW. When she was in 6th grade, she knew, I'm going to college. My other 2, when they got in about 10th grade, they just stalled. They were bored to death. They had different learning styles, and we have a one-size-fits-all sort of a system. And they were really frustrated. Now, my son, if it wasn't for football, he might have dropped out, I don't know. I wouldn't have let him, mind you, but he was very frustrated. Now my son is 22 years old and leading a plumbing crew, and making, I think, $40 an hour or something. It's ridiculous. Now, is he going to do that forever? Well, no, because recently he's talking about maybe I'll go back to school. I'd like to get a business degree and maybe, start my own business or something. Those are, why couldn't that happen in 10th grade? Why couldn't our kids be graduating from 10th? Why do you have to wait until community college and tech, 2 years later? Why can't we start something in 10th grade? I don't know. I don't have all the answers. I'm not an expert. I'm the first one to say that. But I want to talk about different ideas. I want to go to Olympia and break out of this one-size-fits-all mentality, bring stakeholders around the table, and talk about some new ideas, some new fresh ideas. And right off the top of my head, you know, if charter schools are unconstitutional, well, let's figure out a way to make them constitutional, because I think they're a good thing. I think choice is a very good thing. And does that mean that I want to do away with the public school system? Absolutely not. But just imagine this, that $14,000 that we're spending, federal, state, and local, let's imagine we took $7,000 of that via a voucher system, let's just say. And let's say that money followed the backpack. And it could go to a charter school, it could go to a private school, it could go to a public school. What you would have then is you'd have some competition. You know that class size problem that we talk about? Solved. The public school still gets that $7,000, but the student's not there. This creates some competition. The public schools want that $7,000, right? They want that back, so they improve. They start paying their teachers instead of having the money circulating at the top. They start focusing on outcomes. The money flows to the classroom, and you know what? Next thing you know, we've got choice, we've got competition, and the next thing you know, maybe we have a rural high school. You know, maybe we have these different options and opportunities. But all I know is when my partner ran in 2002, we were having that conversation. And we have now kicked the can down the road, and we continue to talk about funding. And again, what could you do with $400,000 and 30 kids? What could you do if you had the freedom? I would love to see a time where a teacher, a passionate teacher, could take that and really run with it. And that's the kind of world I want to live in. And I think to do that, we've got to get outside of the box. And that's why I'm running for office, because I feel Olympia is out of touch. And I don't think we can continue throwing money at a bloated, outdated, government, bureaucratic education system. Thank you so much for listening.
Woo! Talking on the microphone, please.
So we'll have 2 more moderated questions that can be some quicker answers, and then we'll open up to audience questions. So, next is about textbooks. So I know you brought up the racket about textbooks. I think everyone here has felt the pain of textbook costs. So for textbooks, today, the average student pays about $300 a quarter. For more textbook-heavy, especially STEM fields, those textbook costs can run up to $600 or even $800 a quarter. So one thing that the Washington Student Association and Bellevue College and colleges across the state have been advocating for is funding and requirements around open educational resources or open source textbooks as well. So from your perspective, do you support funding for open educational resources, or what other avenues to break up a textbook monopoly would you support? Would you like to start this time?
Sure. Textbooks?
Yes.
You know, since I wanted to enter the legal realm, so to speak, I've kind of worked my way up and I've studied, and let me tell you, I've never used a textbook. Why, in this day and age, do we still allow a textbook monopoly to control the system? And so I would go back to my original premise, which is we need more choice charter vouchers. Let's break outside this box. I think textbooks are kind of archaic, if you will. So, anyway.
Thank you.
So I spent 6 years, 4 years getting my bachelor's in social work and 2 years getting my degree in education and community counseling. I bought books every semester, but I don't think I read any of them. Everything I did was by lecture, and I don't even know many people that do read their textbooks. Lots of people just buy clip notes and have at it. I just think that it's overrated, the textbooks. I think we have to have a better system. I'm honest, I didn't really read the textbooks. Everything that I was tested on was in the lecture. That's where I come from.
Well, and what a lot of students face is having to share textbooks often. So if one student can afford it,
Move
they'll
it.
pass it around. Or even there are textbooks that some schools require where there's actually a code to turn in your homework. So there's homework that's tied to textbook material, and to even turn in your homework, you have to pay for a code. So you have to pay for the textbook, and you have to pay for a code. That's not super widespread, but it's becoming more and more, mostly just because there is the textbook monopoly. That's crazy.
Break the monopolies.
Yeah. Michael?
Number one is I'm for almost anything that brings down the cost of textbooks. But I have a cute little story for you, is that during my senior year in college, I worked as a merchandiser for Nabisco. I worked through school. And what that entailed was when the cookies were delivered, I would put them on the shelves. So I had a lot of fun. So I had a very deep sense of pride with my textbooks because I literally worked for those books. It's 20 some odd years later, and my wife keeps asking me, honey, when are you going to get rid of those books out of the garage? Because after I graduated and I no longer needed them and I went to sell them at the bookstore, those books that I paid $40 and $60 for were worth about $2, and I just refused to give them up. So anyways, I feel the pain of textbooks. I would be for almost anything that brought the cost down, and I think that examining the manufacturers and their little cartel that they have that goes with it, does science advance, or does that book change so much every year? So I'm for bringing that cost down.
So I went to night school, to law school, and I went to night school because I had to pay for it myself. And that meant I had to buy my own textbooks. And so one of my classes was on antitrust. And I went to the bookstore dutifully and bought the book, and got to class, and I opened it up, and there was a picture of my teacher in the book. He wrote it. So after the term was over, I went up to him and I said, I'd like you to sign your picture. And he goes, why do you want me to do that? I said, because maybe it'll be worth more when I sell this back to the bookstore. So it's a racket also in cooperation with teachers, I'm going to say, too. There's a collaboration there, a dark collaboration that we need to break up. And there is a textbook monopoly, and I think that we should go to the online sourcing of books. They should be online, and they should be reasonably priced so that it doesn't break the bank. Like I said, it's outrageous what we have to pay for books, what students have to pay for books today.
So I have a very current familiarity with the outrageous cost of textbooks. I'm just in the process of finishing up a master's degree. I have one class left. The campaign is a little bit of distraction though. So I have been buying textbooks lately, and they are, as everyone has acknowledged, ridiculously priced. I think specifically the opportunity to encourage open source textbooks, which would be free to students, would be fantastic. If we, and the key there is to provide incentives to the faculty to use such open source textbooks. We can come up with what the correct form for such incentives are, but there are actually already some open source college textbooks out there and available. The problem is that your professors aren't choosing to use them. And so the real key then is to come up with an appropriate way to encourage faculty to use the open source textbooks so that you can learn what you need to without it costing anybody anything.
Great, thank you. So, final moderating question. So, a study recently came out that a quarter of all students are at risk of being hungry, mostly due to increased costs of college, rent, transportation, healthcare, etc. So here at Bellevue College, students have been advocating for allowing EBT, electronic benefit transfer, to be allowed on campus. Currently, it's not allowed on campus. So for students that rely on that for most of their food needs, they have to either prep food ahead of time to bring it, but since it's a commuter school, it just becomes a really large issue for many students. So students have been working to support to expand EBT. So do you support expanding EBT on campuses, and or how else would you work on food insecurity for students? Do you want to start with Darcy and go this way?
So I think that making it possible to use EBT on campus is a very straightforward way to start. If someone has food benefits, it's helpful if they can actually usefully use them in the context in which they need to eat. I think that we should also take a look at when we're thinking about the cost of college, doing everything we can to make sure that access to basic necessities, including food, is fully accounted for, and then students have the resources that they need to be able to eat. Every study that's been done has shown that being hungry dramatically impairs learning. If we're going to have folks go to school and spend their money, spend the state's money, spend time, it makes sense to optimize for having people actually learn as much as possible in that environment.
I definitely support expanding EBT on campuses. And I also voted in the legislature this last session for a bill called Breakfast After the Bell that would have allowed high school students to eat breakfast after the first, or during first period, and still get credit for it. And surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, there was pushback to that. It passed the House. As I said, a lot of the legislation comes out of there on a bipartisan basis, and it died in the Senate. But some of the comments I thought were really quite striking. One of my colleagues said, well, some kids just don't need to eat. And I'm like, really? Which ones would those be? Yours? It was a ridiculous comment. Another one said, well, they're not going to be able to learn if they're noshing, I think he used the word, does that sound right? On food. And I said, well, have you ever read the paper and eaten breakfast? It's the same concept. Darcy's absolutely right. It's been proven statistically that students who are hungry don't learn. And so it's a simple thing that we can do, and it's a simple thing that we should do.
Well, I'm going to agree again. I think that the opportunity to use the EBT card on campus, I don't know a lot about it, but it sounds like, why wouldn't you? That's it. I also, I like the idea of allowing high school kids to have a snack after the day starts, because right now high school kids who start at those early hours, that they have a tough time. A lot of kids don't want to eat in the morning, and I think it would be perfectly fine to take time off to eat afterwards. I know that I don't like to miss a meal, and at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning when you're getting ready and you're running out the door, by 10 o'clock you're starving, or even 9 o'clock. So I would be in favor of that. So.
Thank you.